So here we are having a two-way bet, online in shortened sessions for those that cannot attend, and a face-to-face running at the same time and having the opportunity to network, chat and see people face-to-face. I know that we'll be back in another format in 2021, bigger and brighter than before. I'd like to acknowledge and welcome some of the dignitaries in the room today. That's Shane O'Reilly, Chair, Cameron Costello, Deputy Chair of Queensland QTIC, John Sharp, Board Member, Mark Skinner, Board Member, Queensland Tourism, Leanne Coddington, CEO, Jeff Hogg, CEO, Casino Officer, Damien Walker, Jeff McAllister, members of the QTIC Indigenous Network champions who you will notice are in the room and online today. This is a group of volunteer industry members who are leading the way in driving First Nations recruitment and retention across the tourism industry. Folks, today the host is Queensland Tourism Industry Council, the state's peak industry body. In its role as the voice of tourism, QTIC continues to work with their industry partners and government agencies to create greater opportunities for more North First Nations people to participate in Queensland's vibrant tourism industry. On that note, I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome the sponsors of Destination IQ, as their support makes an important contribution to First Nations tourism in Queensland. They include the Star Entertainment Group, Griffith University, Local Tickets, and the Department of State Development and Innovations. Now, before we get started today, just a few housekeeping messages, and then we'll get underway. So the toilets are located in the foyer to your left, to our left. Emergency exits are located to the right inside this room, and besides the toilets in the foyer area. We will have 3 short breaks throughout the day for you to stretch your legs and get some coffee. Please keep your phones on silence and take any calls in the foyer area. Social media, don't forget to share your thoughts, insights and discussions across socials. You can tag at QTIC on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. We'll also be using the Destination IQ 20 and YOIT for today's event. Today, we're also mindful of those in the room and those who have taken the time to join us online. We've also received messages from Minister Ken White, Minister for Indigenous Australians, gesture to the screen, which I'm doing, and Senator Don Farrell, and Senator Don Farrell, Shadow Minister for Tourism. And now welcome us to Yago Country. We also have a pre-recorded clip from Shanna Ruska and the Tribal Experience team.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen from right across the state. My name's Shannon Ruska, and it gives me great honour to give you a welcome to country here. Yo, wife! To all the Queenslanders, First Nations people, we've been working hard behind the scenes and looking forward to the new future ahead as a collective, and I can't wait. But to all our friends in the industry, together we'll be strong. And as a nation, Queensland nation, I can't wait to work together to see what we can provide in the new future.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, Shannon. Tribe Experiences. Your welcomes are very inspirational, and Shannon has been a supporter of the Champions Network for many years. Now it's my pleasure to introduce someone I'm sure you'll all know, Donald Trump. No, Cameron. I'd like to introduce you Cameron Costello, Deputy Chair of QTIC and CEO of Quandamooka, and the Yulla-Burribi Aboriginal Corporation and lead of the group of experts during the developments of the First Nations Tourism Plan, who will talk about the work of the First Nations Tourism Working Group and Year of Indigenous Tourism. Cameron Costello.
Yura everyone, hello from Quandamooka people, and I see a few of my family here at the back. I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we speak. Thanks, Shannon, for his welcome to country. Pay my respects to Yuggera and Turrbal people, lands that we're meeting upon, and also recognise the special week that we're in, the delayed NAIDOC week, but by no means it's lack of importance that we recognise that week and the important role that it's played, and we think of our ancestors and our elders. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So it's an honour to be part of Destination IQ, which has been a journey over many years through QTIC, and Auntie Rhonda Appo has been integral in that. I'd just like to acknowledge the many dignitaries in the room from many diverse areas within the industry, and in particular to our chair and board members and Daniel, who've been very supportive of this role. Destination IQ, the first one was last year, the inaugural one, and it was a great success. And as we have learned to pivot and adjust, we are moving forward into new ways and new means of delivering innovative ways, including virtual welcome to countries. And that's the state of the world at the moment. But we're very, very fortunate in Queensland that we're able to continue somewhat normal lifestyle. And for us, this year was declared the Year of Indigenous Tourism by the Premier earlier, and we're very pleased that through the advocacy of QTIC board and Daniel, that the Premier announced that it will be extended into next year. So the Year of Indigenous Tourism will continue next year, and we're hoping that that provides a whole range of opportunities for us to work together. Today, the first presentation is with me and Anthony McAvoy, who's an extremely extraordinary man who actually, I think one of his first jobs as a lawyer was as a clerk on the Quandamooka native title claim back in the early 90s, and now he's one of the leading barristers in Australia, and we're very honoured to have him and a number of other members that are involved with QTIC in our Indigenous Working Group. So this next session is essentially to look at the work that QTIC's doing around First Nations tourism and how we're looking to advance that through this little document here, which is our Queensland First Nations Tourism Plan. I'm carrying it around like Cameron did with his recovery, with his plan for Queensland. I'll be walking around all day. You can take photos and hopefully vote me back in next year. But I just want to recognise the role that First Nations people themselves, industry and government have played in the last, I think, couple of years in particular. It's been highlighted how we've worked together, recognising and acknowledging First Nations tourism and the role that it has in moving forward. And the sessions today that we'll be looking at, and later in the day there's panels around how do we collectively have a shared vision, how do we collectively work together to drive forward First Nations tourism in Queensland. And I'm very excited about what the future holds, excited about the engagement from all around the state to the outback. I see Suzanne's here, and that's it's amazing as well that she's, we've got this broad scope of goodwill and enthusiasm, and that's what we need to capitalise. And so we're hoping today that we'll look at all those sorts of issues and directions and matters and how we want to collectively work in particular next year, the Year of Indigenous Tourism, it's a massive opportunity for us. And I just had a look at what the vision is for our document, and really it's about positioning First Nations tourism in Queensland. So it says Queensland will be Australia's #1 global destination of choice for First Nation tourism experiences in 2030. And that for me sort of sets where we're collectively heading. And I think it is achievable. And I think that where we are positioned now, there's strong growth in our regions from First Nations people who have seen that particular where they're getting the benefits of their land coming back to them. They're looking to unlock their lands for social, cultural, environmental, economic development. We're seeing more of that. There's a rise in that. There's a rise in recognition by the industry of the importance of First Nation people's voices in their integrating First Nation voices into their everyday operations. Look at Tourism Events Queensland, it's got two First Nations people on their board. I'm on the QTIC board. So we're seeing this movement of industry recognising the benefit of having First Nations voices and integrated in there. And then we've had a government, state and federal, that are looking to support and recognise First Nations tourism as well. So at the moment, there's an alignment, and those alignments may not always sit. So now that's why I think it's an opportunity for us, while we're aligned and we're sharing that joint vision, it's time for us to act, for us to consult, act and move forward and basically set up a legacy as we move forward. I might just go back and I might just go back. Can I go back? How do I do that? Am I controlling this one? It's a dual presentation, so I'm not sure whether I can. Yeah, I'll just go back to the acknowledgement. Yep. And I think this is really important, is that we acknowledge that our industry depends on the lands and waters of our ancestors for our existence. It acknowledges the First Nations people and businesses that seek to ensure that our country is treated with respect and dignity, and who share our culture and knowledge in the endeavour to create some economic parity. So it's really important that, and we've got a presentation, like there's a pre-recording with Rhoda Roberts, one of our keynote speakers later, the importance of land, sea and sky for the First Nations people. It embeds us, it ingrains us. And from that, the preservation and the caring for country is where our identity comes out and the stories come out. And that storytelling, which is really what a lot of tourism is about, is storytelling. It's integral to that, and the authenticity around that is embedded in our cultural practice. And that's an important layer that all of us are coming to recognise, is that it is through, in particular from when I talk about the Quandamooka perspective, is through native title, getting land back has really seen us undertaking land management practice, fire management. So all those sorts of caring for country activities are what embeds us, ingrains our identity, and it helps us to grow and share our stories moving forward. I'll just go to the next slide. So what QTIC has done is set up an Indigenous working group to drive forward this plan. So the background to this plan was last year, one of the things, when I first got onto the board of QTIC, one of the first things we identified that was there was no First Nations tourism plan in Queensland. And we felt that was a key matter for us to deal with. And so we undertook a range of consultations throughout the state. We had workshops where we asked about what is needed to drive First Nations tourism in Queensland forward. And this was the end result. And so that was a really significant milestone and a great outcome for QTIC that it should be very proud about, is that we, Voices of Today, Stories for Tomorrow is about setting that framework of what is needed. And lots of really great feedback came out, from intellectual property to, education and training to marketing. And a lot of it was about empowering First Nations people to lead this journey for the rest of the state. And that's been so well received. And I just want to congratulate everyone who's been involved from government and industry to how they've embraced this concept, which you kind of go, yeah, of course, is that First Nations people help actually drive this. And by allowing First Nations people to drive this in partnership with industry and government is what will make it so successful. And that process took place, and we launched this at the inaugural Destination IQ last year. And QTIC then set up invited First Nations people to form a working group to oversee and drive this. And that First Nations working group there is what we've comprised of people. So it's geographically made up of people from around the state. We looked at people who are involved in different aspects of the sector. So you'll see Uncle Daryl Harris there from the Cairns Indigenous Art Fest. You've got people that are involved with festivals. You've got individual artists like Shanae Sutton. You've got Tony McAvoy, who's involved with the tourism development in the outback with Suzanne. But he's also got a strong legal background as well, because when we're talking about a lot of these things, there are legal aspects to them. And of course, we've just had industry greats like David Hudson and, you know, Willie. Yes, you are great. I admit it. I didn't just lose a bet that I had to say that after Origin last night. I actually do genuinely feel like he's a legend of the industry. And of course, we've got Suzanne there from the Outback, representing the Outback, and others as well. So Torres Strait. So that's the working groups there. I might just go to the next slide, which is about what's the role of the working group. The role of the working groups really to help us see the implementation of this plan and get it moving. So there's a number of things within this, and if you don't have a copy of the plan, please do. It's got 6 action areas or 6 pillars about recognition and respect, engagement and partnerships, strategic coordination and structure, training, skills development and jobs, marketing and awareness, and authentic product development. One of those critical things that came clearly through our consultation and also through both Destination IQ and Destination Q is around a voice, an advocacy voice for First Nations people. So we've had, you know, people from Canada and New Zealand talking about the role of First Nations peak bodies in tourism and how they work well with industry. And one of those is a key outcome that we're looking to progress is to look at that peak body for First Nations tourism in Queensland. So this working group will help to oversee that and help drive forward there's different goals. So there's probably some major pieces of work that we're doing, but a critical one is how do we, like in WA, they have WATOC, the Western Australian Indigenous Tourism Organisation. So there's already some of those places that have that. And so we need to now look at how do we have that within Queensland and where does it sit? How does it work? How will it be sustainable and viable moving forward? Because if you look at Canada, I think they're up to their, 7th version, because they've gone through the process of actually learning about what is a sustainable organisation. So they've had ones that have failed, and now they're in one that's been working really well. So how do we look at a model that is going to be representative? How does it drive forward a positive agenda, deals with advocacy, and provides the sector and government and with the advice and that it needs. So at the moment, QTIC's sort of providing that incubator role of actually, we developed the tourism strategy, the First Nations tourism strategy. If you did have a peak body, they'd probably develop it. You know, the Year of Indigenous Tourism, they would probably host that. You know, protocols and guidelines and codes of conduct for industry, that peak body would probably develop those and in partnership with you know, industry and community, and then they would advocate that. So that's where we're heading, is how do we get that body that will work with QTIC and government to drive forward that agenda. That's one major piece of work that will be significant that we're looking forward to having finalised in 2021, the Year of Indigenous Tourism. So we're hoping that in the Year of Indigenous Tourism, that will be a key outcome and a legacy of the Year of Indigenous Tourism. The other thing that we're looking at is the First Nations Tourism Plan. The Queensland Government is funding QTIC to drive forward some of the other action areas within the plan. Some of those about how do we create 100 jobs. We want to see 100 you know, First Nations people employed in the tourism sector next year. We want new First Nations businesses. How do we get this growth of the number of First Nations tourism businesses happening? So there's some of those key things that we're looking at, you know, training, employment, they're critical things. a cultural framework that we're looking at, which Tony McAvoy will talk to shortly. And then the other things are around the access to industry events. So those expos and stuff that we go around to, now's the time that we've got a growing number of First Nations product out there, and how do we get them represented at those industry expos and forums as well, and putting on Destination IQ so that we can bring everyone together to jointly plan, jointly celebrate what we're achieving. And Destination IQ is one of those key things where we will be able to work together and look at how we plan and map things out moving forward, and of course celebrate. I think a few people might have celebrated last night already, but I'll be looking forward to tonight. So that the role of the working group there talks about what we're doing, and through QTIC, and we work back and work very collaboratively with the board, with QTIC, and I just want to, I've acknowledged it before, but it does, it's amazing, really, the support that we've had from QTIC, their board. And I've been on a lot of boards, but I've got to say that the QTIC board has been so supportive, and Daniel Geschwind as well has been extremely supportive for First Nations tourism. And there's someone that I trust, and I will continue to trust, and I thank them very much for that. And I believe that the sector and our communities can trust them, that they will work through the Indigenous Working Group, and that working group, they don't muck around. If there's the kind of people that we've got on there are serious players, and they're taking this extremely seriously. They will help to take us forward in the future, and you can feel confident that they will provide and work in an authentic way for our mobs. So I want to thank the working group too. Is Tony online yet? Yeah. So what we're going to do is, was I going to speak to any more slides? Is there any more slides I've got to talk to? Oh, there's a terms of reference and a scope of work which I've already talked about anyway, which is those different. If you just go to that one, it talks about the different elements that we're working on, that we're driving forward. Stop laughing at me, you mob over there. So I'll be able to talk. You'll hear me talk more about this during the day, but essentially, you know, community industry consultations, the project scope is what the working group's got to do. So we're looking at how do we scope out what a First Nations, how do we scope out how we're going to develop a First Nations body. The strategy development, to look at what's the strategy for that body, how does it move forward, and what measures of success as well. So it's that whole sort of development around it. How do we measure whether something's going to be successful? When you think of what a peak body does, it's not a small task, and that's the challenge that we've got. In the timeline, we've got 2 years where the working group's formed. They'll work towards 2 years, and hopefully by then it'll be a transition over to you know, the actual body that's established as well. So that's the plan, and it's an exciting time ahead. A lot of work, but we're committed to doing that. I think that's it. Yep, and that's the major projects that I talked about before. See, I didn't need any slides, just knew it. And so we'll go hand over to Tony. Tony, are you out there? Tony, is there anywhere to be heard?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Can you see
Tony
me
McAvoy, everyone.
on the screen? Thank you. I know that there's wild applause somewhere. Thanks, Cameron. I to pay my respects to all the First Nations people and First Nations there who are tuned in today, and they're in person. I wish I could be there. I've been a COVID refugee in New South Wales for the last 10 months, I suppose, 9 months. I'm looking forward to potentially getting back there up across the border in December. We'll see how we go. I'm going to speak about a couple of the issues that are coming up in the under the heading of major projects. and then I'll hand back to Cameron to finish off this presentation. My role is as a member of the working group, but as you know, I'm a Rooty man, Central Queensland. I've been in Sydney though for 20 odd years, and my interest, even though from afar, is in seeing how we can make tourism in Queensland something that we own a big part of. I think that the opportunity exists in this process for the nature of tourism in Queensland to be changed so that the first thing people think of when they come to Queensland is not beaches, but culture and cultural business, cultural tourism. With that in mind, the first major project I wanted to speak about is a formation of the First Nations Tourism Council. The proposals here represent my own thoughts. They're not ones that have been endorsed by the working party as yet, but this is how, from my participation in the working group and hearing the discussions that have taken place, I think it might be able to be done. I should say that in addition to what Cameron has said about the need for an advocacy body and a development body in the form of a council, we know from some very detailed research that has been done in Canada that the key difference between the position that First Nations are in Canada with respect to their tourism and what occurs here is the existence of a First Nations Tourism Advocacy Council. And so I think everybody on the working group understands that the formation of this council is critical to the future success in this sector. And there is a need to get it as right as possible, but understand that it will, like all companies, like all councils, need refinement over time. So my recommendations are that it be a company limited by guarantee. That means it is a company incorporated under the Corporations Act rather than under the Corporations Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island Act. So it's not a CATSI company. It's a company in which there is membership rather than shareholding. So it's not I'm not suggesting it be a proprietary limited company, but a company limited by guarantee. In that case, usually in not-for-profit type enterprises such as this would be, the company, the members would guarantee the debts of the company to a certain amount. And usually it's in the vicinity of $10 or $20 or something like that. So that if the company goes broke, the creditors can't get any more from the members than whatever the guaranteed amount is. My suggestion is that the membership be confined to First Nations tourism operators, and there will be questions which arise as to how that is determined. So the first question would be whether the operators are First Nations, and there's ways in which that can be done. It might be that there's a requirement to be registered or certified by some other process. Secondly, there's a very broad question as to what is tourism and therefore who is a tourism operator. So tourism might include educational and land management, other type of operations. And the third question arises in relation to who are operators. And that might include people who are seeking entry into the sector or seeking to expand their existing operation into the tourism sector. So those sorts of decisions will need to be discussed and fleshed out in a document which can then be consulted upon. The company, the council, would also, in my view, be enabled to enter into partnerships with government and industry allies. And that partnership may be informal, so administrative type partnership, or it may be something that is formalised where they have an associate membership in the company. My initial preference is that it be informal, but it's not my decision, and I'm merely trying to flesh out a few of the issues so that people can have a discussion about it and push it forward. The roles of this council, First Nations Tourism Council, will include advocacy. So that would ensure that when there is changes to legislation, when there's changes to policy, when budgets are being developed by government, that somebody is speaking on behalf of Indigenous tourism operators in the Indigenous tourism sector. I have the view that it should be able to and be resourced to engage in marketing. So we have specific marketing. It should be sufficiently resourced to engage in policy development. So it can engage directly with government about what the overarching or quite discrete policies might look like. It can engage in, it could engage in member support, so that it might provide members of the council with information on all matters relevant to operating an Indigenous tourism venture, including taxation, other interests, employment issues, grants, the whole range of support that you might expect from that type of organisation. And I've added to that list of roles support for innovation, and I think that being a new sector, we have the opportunity to really seek out and develop innovative tourism products and methodologies, and having an overarching body that can pour some resources into that or support the development at by members or at a local or regional level is very important. So that not only are we seeking to take a bite of the existing tourism market, but we're creating our own market in addition. I imagine, in the way these things are normally done, that there would be an executive committee which is determined by the membership, who has the role of overseeing the day-to-day operations of the company. They would be likely be directors, and there might need to be a smaller committee that deals with the more urgent matters. And it's my understanding that this First Nations Tourism Council would take over from where the working group leaves off, or the working group would hand over to the First Nations Tourism Council, so that it then picks up the work that's been done to date. As I say, these are my ideas as to how it should be formed. I imagine that drafting the constitution and incorporation documents for such a council would not be difficult. I've been involved in this sort of establishment of this type of corporation many times, as have many lawyers who are involved in this, in working with the First Nations community. So it's not difficult to do in terms of the mechanics of it, but in terms of ensuring that the Indigenous tourism sector comes along with and supports and feels adequately represented by such a body, there is work to be done. And that's why I imagine that there will need to be a degree of consultation about the form, with a view to incorporation some point towards the middle of next year. I just now propose to move on to discussion about the development of an overarching cultural framework. This has been identified in the plans for the working group, and my understanding of it is that it involves setting out the broad principles which will support and deliver a vibrant and sustainable First Nations tourism sector. So it's a matter about which there are a number of things to consider, and not least of which is what is First Nations tourism, what support is needed, and how might that broad cultural framework be captured in writing. So the working party is still working on that document, but that overarching cultural framework then informs the law and policy review, which is being undertaken together with Norton Rose Fulbright Australia. That firm has volunteered some pro bono assistance in conducting this review. I've had two meetings with them trying to scope the size of the project out. One of the issues was the election which has just passed, and concern that I had, and Norton Rose Fulbright, Gavin Scott from Norton Rose Fulbright had, about the appetite for reform that a different government might have. And so we delayed doing too much work on it to see what the result of this election was. And fortunately for the First Nations tourism sector, the Labor government was returned, and so the promises and commitment to development of this sector stay alive, and we're able to use the next 4 years to try and bed down all those legislative and policy changes. And what's meant by the review is that there are a number of areas in which policy and law in Australia and in Queensland in this particular case are not of assistance to or impede or just do not exist to assist First Nations tourism. And this project is about trying to identify what would be the best case scenario and what changes would need to be undertaken to ensure the development, growth and sustainability of the First Nations tourism sector. And I've indicated that we would imagine a public discussion paper to be available about May next year. The third issue I wanted to raise under the cultural framework is a concept that I have developed basically on my own, but in discussion with Cameron and Rhonda, and We haven't had a chance to discuss it in detail at all at the working group, but the notion is that this new body, the First Nations Tourism Council, enters into an agreement. I've called it a First Nations Tourism Accord, an agreement between that council, the Queensland Government, QTIC, other industry representatives, with a 5 to 10 year operation to identify some agreed principles and actions and strategies that take us all past the year of Indigenous tourism, but also have the effect of committing all of the parties, including if there's a change of government, to an agreed set of outcomes and strategies going into the future. So I've done a little bit of work on what that type of agreement might look like. I have no doubt that it can be done with willing parties, and it's something that needs to be advanced with the working group in preparation for handing over to the council at the appropriate point. I'm going to hand back to Cameron now to talk about the Year of Indigenous Tourism, but of course, both he and I are going to be available for questions on those matters. I wish I was there in person, but this is how it has to be done. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. So we have been actually doing some work behind the scenes. Thank you, Tony. And yeah, it is now moving into the action phase of these types of discussions around the First Nations Tourism Council, whatever it will be called. A critical component of that, to me, is First Nations consultation. So we'll be developing the methodology of how we're actually going to roll out consultation among First Nations people. But equally as important is the consultation with government and industry as well. So how does such a council interact with QTIC? How does it interact with regional tourism organisations? These are key critical discussions that we'll be wanting to have as we go out to regions and talk to First Nations people. We'll be wanting to talk to regional tourism organisations about how we can, what's the opportunities that we can develop through RTO system and this organisation as well, and also with government. So what we're hoping is that we'll drive forward these consultations and we'll get to the framework, and then the formation and then the how we work together, which is what the Accord will do, and that'll set us forward. I think that's the legacy that we're hoping, one of many legacies during the year of Indigenous tourism. I just wanted to point out the role of such an organisation has been clear to me watching the Canadian First Nations Tourism Organisation just on Twitter throughout the pandemic, and when it first was unfolding. I know internally within QTIC we were advocating via QTIC for First Nations tourism not to be forgotten in the COVID world and the recovery, and seeing Keith Henry tweeting out constantly about First Nations tourism in Canada and how they were engaging with government and calling on government to not forget First Nations tourism in Canada, and then seeing them getting funding, them actually getting funding passes from government for that sort of, I thought was really interesting to watch play out in real time of what was happening overseas through their representative, their advocacy body. And it was through there was the united sort of approach from industry and government supporting each other, and there were some great outcomes being achieved. And I just thought, oh, that's where we could potentially be down the track. So I just want to reinforce to our sector friends and our industry friends and government friends that this next few months around consultation and how we work is going to be really critical for everyone to put forward their ideas, what issues may potentially arise, how we address those issues. They're all critical things that we need to hear from everybody. So whilst we're getting our methodology about how we're going to actually roll out the consultation, I encourage you that we need you all to start thinking about these issues and how we can develop a model that's going to really work and benefit all of us to achieve that goal, that vision that I mentioned at the start. The Year of Indigenous Tourism is a massive opportunity for all of us. And the reason we wanted a Year of Indigenous Tourism was because we saw how successful it was being for the Outback, Year of the Outback. And that was an amazing outcome and amazing results. And we were seeing that unfold, and we went, we should look to having a Year of Indigenous Tourism. It makes sense that we're the next cab off the rank to try the sector that needs to get some support and assistance. So that was raised up through the board and was supported. So we talked about it at the Indigenous Champions Network, and we raised it. And so we wrote to the Premier, and Daniel did some excellent lobbying, and it got announced at the last Destination Q, which was in September, late September last year, because the bushfires had started and the Premier couldn't come. She was there, but she had to go, and then and I think so. It was there that she made that announcement, and then post bushfire disaster, we had COVID, and again through the lobbying, we had it extended to next year, which is a great outcome. And further to that was the funding, and so the Year of Outback Tourism had received a funding backing from the government. I think it was around 10 million. And so naturally we wanted to see some investment into the Year of Indigenous Tourism and what that might look like. So that's where there was discussions with government, and they were very supportive, set up I think Year of Indigenous Tourism working group that had representatives from the state, I think the Premier's office, the Tourism Department, QTIC, Tourism Events Queensland. I think might have had a couple of other industry reps, and so they were talking about that. And so there was a infrastructure funding, which I think later today there'll be a panel presentation around that and talking a bit more about that. But there was some of those critical things about saying, if we're going to have a Year of Indigenous Tourism, we've just developed this First Nations tourism plan, you should go to implementing some of those outcomes. And so that's essentially what we're hoping to do. We're hoping to draw a focus through marketing. So there's TEQ, was looking at a marketing campaign around Indigenous tourism. But even now I'm thinking of how do we celebrate the Year of Indigenous Tourism? And I think there's a role for everybody, and it can be so simple and so small about how we want to all contribute to the Year of Indigenous Tourism and how we can celebrate through our own businesses. How do we integrate through our own businesses celebration of the Year of Indigenous Tourism? How can we promote Indigenous tourism product? And those are going to be really critical things for us. And so I think there was the escape section on the weekend, and they had the pull-out thing, and I went, oh, wouldn't it be great if we just emailed the editor of that and said, oh, for your escape section next year in the Sunday Mail, it's the Year of Indigenous Tourism, you could have Indigenous artwork on your design colours, and each weekend throughout the year, you promote one Indigenous tourism experience from around Queensland. So those are the kinds of things that could be really simple, and we can just engage, potential partners and start thinking about that and going, well, how can we just do really simple things that actually collectively create something really special for the Year of Indigenous Tourism next year? So there's the run-of-the-mill stuff. Yes, we'll get government and TQ and QTIC, and we'll be doing our things, but how do we individually or through our businesses look to celebrate? And I think what we will do is looking again at the Year of Outback Tourism. They had their website, and it was opportunities, people who want to know, how can my business support? That's what we're hoping to do, is look at those sorts of avenues for people as well. So the funding that was committed by the state government, they'd already advertised, they've gone out for grant rounds and all that sort of stuff as well. So that's kicking along, and they've helped fund us to drive this and the formation of First Nations tourism body. So there's things that are going to be progressing, but I think collectively we want to say, let's not waste the Year of Indigenous Tourism. Let's look at what we can do to have a legacy and a platform laid for the future beyond the Year of Indigenous Tourism, which I think Tony's sort of flagged there a couple of potential things that could happen, key signings of agreements between bodies as well. So it's going to be a great year, an exciting year. And I just think already the number of people that have come forward and are wanting to be part of it. I think a lot of our existing sponsors that have sponsored today have been really backing what we're doing, and I just want to thank them for that. That really is the end of my presentation. And I just want to thank Tony McAvoy, who is an extremely busy man, dealing with a lot of important cases and decisions across the nation, and thank him for being part of the working group, and his work is going to be really integral. That the legal mind that he has is quite phenomenal. And yes, I did say that, Tony. I'm just like with David, I didn't lose a bet. But it is great, and we've got such a great working group that I'm just honoured that we've got from, tourism operators through to, festival managers and legal minds. It's great. So thank you everybody for coming today, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you. You'll probably see me again later today, so you'll be sick of me by the end. But thanks a lot, and have a great day.